Hello everyone, I'm Priyadarshini Mahara, faculty at the Department of Buddhist Studies, University of Delhi. Today, I'm going to discuss with you module number 36, which is titled Dependent Origination. And this module belongs to paper number 11 of Philosophy of Buddhism. Now, when we look at the title, it says Dependent Origination. So, dependent origination is termed in Pali as pratityasamutpada and in Sanskrit as pratityasamutpada. Before we get into what dependent origination is, let us see this particular word pratityasamutpada. What does this stand for or how it is derived? The term pratityasamutpada, in this term, samupad means the arising of something. Upad means arising. Now, patich means because of or as a result of something. Therefore, the compound term patich samupad means arising of something as a result of a cause or causes. So here when we say arising of something, it points out to dukkha. In brief, this is called dependent origination or dependent arising. Dependent on ignorance, conceptions arise. Dependent on conceptions, consciousness arises. So we have 12 links which are given rise to by the previous link or the predecessor. So when we talk about dependent origination, as we've talked earlier about the Four Noble Truths, when we talk about dependent origination, the doctrine of dependent arising also comes out the Four Noble Truths. It can be placed in the notion of the first noble truth, which talks about suffering. The same dependent arising can be placed in the second noble truth, which talks about causes of suffering. And the same noble truth or the same dependent arising can be placed in the third noble truth, which talks about the cessation of suffering. Also, this dependent arising can be placed in the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. So if you see, then there is a strong relation between the noble truths and dependent arising. Now, let us see what dependent arising means. Firstly, it constitutes of 12 links. Dependent on ignorance, conceptions arise. Dependent on conceptions, consciousness arises. Dependent on consciousness, mentality and materiality arises. Dependent on mentality and materiality, the 6 internal senses, bases arise. Dependent on the 6 internal bases, contact occurs. Dependent on contact, feeling arises. Dependent on feeling, craving arises. Dependent on craving, attachment arises. Dependent on attachment, there is existence. Dependent on existence, rebirth takes place. Dependent on rebirth, old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, unhappiness, and disappear arises. Thus, this is the arising of whole mass of dukkha. This is called dependent origination. So you see, when you look at these categories, the causes and effects, they all lead to the aggregation of what we call suffering or dukkha. Now, when we get into all these factors, there are 12 factors, so we begin with the first factor, which is called avidya. Avidya or avidya is unknowing or ignorance of dukkha. It causes its cessation and the way leading to the cessation, the Four Noble Truths. And according to Abhidharma, not knowing what went before, the past, what comes after, the future, what came both before and after, the past and the future, and the principle of dependent origination. Ignorance is believing that this very self will be reborn in various states due to particular actions. That after death there is nothing, that life is a random process in which good and evil actions bear no fruit. That simply by adhering to a certain group one will automatically be saved. That material wealth will provide true happiness. So, this is what we mean when we say ignorance or avidya. When we talk about ignorance, we see that there are certain things which we are ignorant about. When we look into dependent origination, by ignorance we pointing out to the permanence or the impermanence. When we mistake the impermanent to be permanent, when we mistake the conditioned to be unconditioned, this is what we are ignored of, and this leads to suffering in life. Coming to the next factor, it is called sankhar or volitional impulses, bodily formation or intentional actions, verbal formations or intentional speech, mental formations or thoughts. Volitional impulses constitute thinking and intending in accordance with those beliefs, considering and planning actions in accordance with those intentions, some good, some bad, and some neutral. When we talk about volitional activities, these are the activities done by a person with all senses in performance. Intentionally done actions can be termed as volitional activities, and they are grouped into good, which would be wholesome, bad, which would be unwholesome, and neutral, which are neither wholesome nor unwholesome. So that is what is sankhar, and ignorance give rise to sankhar. Now, sankhar or volitional activities give rise to vinyan or consciousness. Consciousness through ear, eyes, nose, tongue, and body and mind, which includes the rebirth linking consciousness, which means vinyan. The 6 consciousnesses are included in this factor. Consciousness leads to the perception and awareness of sensations, which will be related to particular intentions. Mind or consciousness is fashioned into specific qualities by intention. At death, the momentum of volitional impulses propelled by the law of karma induces the so fashioned relinking consciousness to take a sphere of birth and level of existence appropriate to it. This is known as rebirth. So when we have in the beginning ignorance, ignorance is giving rise to sankhar or volitional attitude. Then these volitional attitude is giving rise to consciousness or vinyan. And this consciousness arises through 6 factors, which includes eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Then we have the 6 consciousnesses: consciousness of perception and awareness of sensation, which are related to particular intentions. Mind or consciousness is fashioned into specific qualities by intention. We have vinyan here under consciousness, which points out to rebirth linking consciousness as well. When we come to an end, our life comes to an end, but we are born again. It is this vinyan that links one birth to another. Now, consciousness gives rise to body and mind, which is known as Nam and Roop. And this is the fourth constituent or the link in the dependent arising. Nam means name or mind, feeling, perception, intention, contact, attention, or according to what the texts have to say, the khan or of feeling, perception and violation, impulses, and roop points out to body or materiality. The four elements, earth, water, wind, and fire, and all forms dependent on them. So this is what we mean when we say Nam and Roop, mind or body and materiality. Body and mind, the process of rebirth proceeds to create a life form primed to generate more karmic actions. As a result, there is the Roop, Vedana, Sanya and Sankhar. Roop, Vedana, Sanya and Sankhar come into existence as a result of this formation of Nam and Roop. In their complete entity with the distinct qualities and defects endowed on them by the fashioning influence of conditions or constrained by the limitation of that particular sphere of existence, be it in human, animal or any other being. Coming to the next link, we see that the fifth link of dependent arising is called Salayatan or the sixth sense basis. We have Nam and Roop. Nam and Roop give rise to Salayatan or the sixth sense basis. So what are these six sense bases? They are eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. The six sense bases proceed further. A sentient being must have the means to communicate with its environment in order to function and develop within it. Thus, supported by body and mind and in conformity with karmic momentum, the organism proceeds to develop the six sense bases, the sense organs of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. So there is the development which is called Salayatan or the sixth sense basis. So these are developed after the containment of Nam and Roop, after the body and the mind comes into formation. The sixth factor or the link of pratityasamutpada or dependent arising is called Phas. Phas means contact. It points out to eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact and mind contact. So when we talk about Phas or contact, we see that they come into existence after the six sense bases have come into formation. Then the seventh link or the factor in dependent arising is Vedana. Vedana means feeling. Now feelings can be of pleasure, pain and even indifference, arising from eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. When we look at Phas, which means contact of the six sense bases, along with Vedana, which means feeling that arises after the six sense bases come in contact with their object. Therefore, we can say the feelings or appreciation of the qualities of sense contacts be of comfort, which means pleasant feeling, which is also termed as Sukh Vedana, discomfort or painful feeling, which is termed as dukh vedana or unpleasant feeling, or even indifference or equanimity, which means neutral feeling, or upekha vedana. So these are the three different types of feelings which arises when the sense objects or the sense organs come in contact with the objects. In conformity with the nature of unenlightened beings, the process does not stop there but goes on. So, when human beings, the formation of Nam and Roop, the body has come into existence along with the mind, the six sense bases come into formation. After the six sense bases have come into formation, we see that the bases have contact with the objects, which means phus. After phus, we have Vedana arising, which points out to different feelings of pleasure, Sukh Vedana, displeasure, Dukh Vedana, as well as neutral feelings of existence. So these feelings further lead to Tanha, which is the eighth factor in the dependent arising. Tanha means craving, craving for sounds, craving for odor, craving for taste, craving for bodily sensation, craving for mind objects, craving for mind objects. When we talk about the mind objects, they are further divided into six cravings, six different kinds of cravings. So why do you think this craving arises? Now, when your body has come into existence, your sensations or the sense faculties have also been formulated. After the sense faculties have been formulated, there's a contact between the object and the sense faculties. Through the contact between the object and the sense faculties, there arises different types of feelings. Sometimes you might like an object, or you might feel the feeling of pleasure looking at a particular object, seeing or hearing a particular object, smelling a particular object, tasting a particular object, or thinking or touching a particular object. So, these feelings arise, and the same can be for those objects which give rise to the feeling of displeasure in you. Or for that matter, there would be certain objects for which you would not have any feeling, and those are the neutral objects. Now, sometimes when you see the objects that give pleasure in you or that bring out the pleasure in you are more wanted, you have a craving for those objects. So cravings can be comfortable feelings, tend to produce liking and enjoyment, desire for and seeking after more of the same. For the stressful feeling or discomfort, there is displeasure, a desire to destroy or get rid of them. Neutral feeling in this context is considered to be a subtle form of pleasant feeling because it does not disturb the mind and invokes a certain amount of compliancy. So when we talk about the neutral feelings, here neutral feelings do not represent any feeling. Rather, they lean more towards the subtle form of pleasant feeling. Why? Because they do not disturb the mind and do not invoke a certain amount of uncompliancy. Rather, they invoke a certain amount of compliancy. Now, the ninth factor that comes in the link of pratityasamutpada is called upada, which means clinging to sense objects. So, that is sight, sound, odor, taste, and bodily sensation. Clinging on to these sense objects is known as upada. clinging to views, clinging to rules and practices, clinging to concepts of self. Clinging is a desire that intensifies and it becomes a holding on to or clinging to the object in question. As long as an object is yet attained, there is craving. As soon as the object is attained, it is held fast by clinging. This refers not only to sense objects but also to ideas and views, modes of practice or techniques, and the feeling of self. Clinging further gives rise to bhav, which means becoming. The conditions which lead to birth, also realms of existence. The sense realm, the realm of form, the realm of formless. When we talk about Roop, Aroop and Bhav, this is what we are pointing out to. So this becoming is the intention and deliberate action to produce and control things in accordance with the directives of clinging, leading to further rotation of the whole process of behavior. Being good karma, bad karma or neutral karma depending on the qualities of craving and clinging which condition them. For example, let us see an example here. One who desires to go to heaven will do those things which he or she believes will lead to rebirth in heaven, thus laying the groundwork for the 5 khand to appear in the realm appropriate to those actions. With the process of certain karma thus in full swing, one link give rise to the next. So we have bhav or becoming, and that gives rise to jati. Now jati is birth, the arising of khand and the sense basis. When we talk about bhav, bhav is the intention or the desire to be born again, and jati takes the formation of aggregates of skand as well as the sense basis in form of birth. The appearance or arising of things. Dependent origination cycle in one mind moment. Birth is the beginning with the relinking consciousness, which we've already talked about, which means vinyan, and this is endowed with features contingent on its karmic momentum. So when we have done certain karmic actions, then we have to wait for the resultant or karmic vipak. Vipak is known as resultant. So if you have done certain karmic actions or performed certain actions in your previous life, then you are born again along with vinyan, which is the rebirth linking consciousness into this birth. Now, when we are performing certain actions in this birth, you might get the repercussion or the resultant in this birth itself. Otherwise, you will have to take a next birth along with many other factors, and there you will have the resultant of your actions which you are performing in your present birth. The 5 skand arise in a new life, comprising name and form, the 6 sense bases, contact and feeling. Then the 12th factor is Jara Maran, aging and death. Jara, the aging process, the fading of the faculties, and Maran, the breaking up of the khand, the dissolution of the life principle, which means death. Alternatively, the dissipation and dissolution of the phenomena. Now, this aging and death also points out to the decay and dissolution of the series of conscious life. For the unenlightened beings, these things are constantly threatening life in either overt or covert ways. Therefore, in the life of the unenlightened being, old age and death inevitably bring with them sorrow in different forms. We have lamentation, dukh or pain, which means domanas, grief and upayas, despair, which all in all can be summed up as simply suffering. So this whole cycle of pratityasamutpada points out to suffering. The movement from ignorance till death and decay leads to suffer, and this is not the end. The death and decay just do not bring an end to the cycle of rebirth, birth and rebirth. We have in the final words of the principle of dependent origination, thus is the arising of this whole mass of suffering. However, as the principle of dependent origination functions as a cycle, it does not stop there. The last factor becomes a crucial link in further continuation of the cycle of birth and rebirth. The cycle of dependent origination is also known as the wheel of becoming, which is termed as bhav chakra or wheel of samsara. This model covers 3 lifetimes. Ignorance and volitional impulses are in 1 lifetime. Consciousness to becoming are in 2nd lifetime, while birth and aging and death with sorrow, lamentation and so on occur in a 3rd. Taking the middle life span as the present one, we can divide 3 life periods with the entire 12 links of dependent origination into 3 time periods. And what are these 3 time periods? The past life, in which we have ignorance and volitional impulses. Then we have the present life, in which we place consciousness, body and mind, sense bases, contact, feeling, craving, clinging and becoming. Then in the 3rd life, which is the future life, we have birth, aging and death, which is endowed with sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair. This is how life arises, exists and continues. If we take this formula in its reverse order, we come to the cessation of the process. When we look at the cycle of dependent origination, when we look at these 12 links, we see that a cycle or a circle does not have a beginning. Can you point out to a beginning in a circle? It just starts and just moves on and on. So you cannot say that this is the beginning. If you cannot say that this is the beginning of the circle, then how do we place ignorance or avidya to be the first of the 12 links of dependent origination? Do you have an answer to that, or did you even think about that question, that if it is a circle, then how can we place only avidya or ignorance to be the first cause? Why not nam roop or sense spaces or coming into existence, which is bhav or birth? This is because due to ignorance, we do not know which is the first cause, and that is the reason we place ignorance or avidya on the top to be the first cause of existence. When we look at this whole circle of dependent origination, we see that if we move in clockwise direction in this cycle of dependent arising, which is also known as anulom, then we are stuck in the suffering of human existence. Now, in the same circle, if we start to move in a reverse order, which is known as patilom, we go on destroying all these factors that entrap us in the phenomenal existence of suffering. And there is a point when we remove ignorance and we reach the state of the absolute, and that is the state of the ultimate liberation called nirvana. Through the complete cessation of ignorance, violational activities or karmic formations come to an end. Through the cessation of violational activities, consciousness ceases. Through the cessation of birth, decay, death, sorrow, etc., cease. It should be clearly remembered that each of these factors is conditioned, which means pratityasamutpada, as well as conditioning. Therefore, they all are relative, interdependent, and interconnected, and nothing is absolute or independent. Hence, no first cause is accepted. As we have seen earlier, conditioned genesis should be considered as a circle and not as a breakage link. And this is what is when we talk about pratityasamutpada or dependent arising. This points out to the reality of phenomenal existence, which is based on a causal and effect link. When there is a cause, there is an effect. If we remove the effect, the cause also gets diminished. And this is the whole idea of dependent origination, to bring you to the reality of phenomenal existence. Thank you.